Watching at home because of our live stream, because we are being streamed live. So you can go to your own place and see what's happening here or there, or you can watch it back after the program ends. My name is Jürgen Torfung and I will be your moderator for tonight. And tonight we'll have the 27th edition of the Freedom Lecture. We're very honored that we have a very special guest in our midst, and of course that's Sudanese artist and political cartoonist Khalid Albaih. As we can go around to have a little bit of context, while parts of the Arab world were caught up in revolution, another kind of change happened in Sudan. Because in 2011, the country voted in the referendum to become two different countries, and South Sudan became an independent nation. To express the frustration and the sadness people experienced, that North Sudanese experienced, the cartoon was also developed by Khalid, where you can call it "Sudan Needs a Hug." That's a cartoon we see over there. It expressed the feeling of sadness and the feeling of loss. Anyway, Khalid's activism is being expressed in his work and in his cartoons. And in his cartoons, there are very few, if any, words being used. And that also gives an opportunity for a lot of people to connect with the work, be it college professors or even children at sometimes. Tonight, Khalid will share his visions on social change through art, and he will share his ideas about the current state in Sudan and what is the meaning of freedom. We'd like to hear him talk about that as well. Are you going to talk about that? In a way. Yeah, okay, very good. And after his speech, we'll have a panel discussion with Pravini Baboeram, who's here as well, who's an artist and anti-racism activist. And I discovered tonight that she's a singer as well. We've been known each other for quite a while, but now I know you're a singer, which I'm a fan of immediately. So very nice to have you here. We can start our evening after. I'd like to thank our sponsors, the VE Fund, and Democracy and the Media Foundation for making this evening possible. All right. With any other delay, I would like to give you the floor. Please give a warm hand to Khalid Albaih.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm very happy to be here. Very, very happy. I'm very honored, actually. Thank you very much for the nice introduction. So I'm going to just run really quickly and tell you how I got here. I'm from Sudan. Sudan was the biggest country in Africa. Not a lot of people know a lot of things about Sudan, including Sudanese people, which is kind of a problem that we are still facing with our identity. Sudan, just to give you a few information that, pieces of information, Sudan has the most pyramids in the world. They're very small and skinny like us, and there's theories that the tops of the pyramids were gold, and some theories say that because they served as streetlights. So when at night, with the reflection of the moon, the whole town, the whole desert will light up from the gold on top of the pyramids, and of course, all the way from Aswan until Khartoum, that's called Nubia, right? And everybody heard of the term Nubian queens, right? And that's because, it was ruled by queens, definitely. And the name of those queens is Candaces, right? And in the Bible, that name is mentioned, and it's mentioned as Candace, right? So the name Candace is actually the name of the Nubian queens. So now we have two countries, of course, I mean, for me, it really doesn't matter how many countries, because I think of these borders, we didn't really make these borders to begin with. So it's made up borders with, so as you can see, the line between Egypt and Sudan is actually a line. right? So some people are on that line. There's some from the same tribe. Some people are that line, and some people are on that the other end of the line. So there's, you know, as I said, there's a lot of richness in the heritage of Sudan, and I read this statistic that said all the ethnic groups in Africa exist in Sudan, so anybody can be Sudanese, and this is something that we should celebrate. But we spent the last 50 years arguing about it. I was born in Romania, so I'm a black Romanian. There's a lot of us. I was born in Romania because my father was a diplomat. I didn't spend any time there. Most border police think the passport is not really a good fake passport at all. I come from, like many other Sudanese families, that, you know, since the creation of Sudan and the independence from the British and the Egyptians, we were all involved in politics. Everybody talks about politics all the time. This is what we do. You know, everyone is involved in it. And I come from a very political family. This is one of my uncles. His name is Babikr Noor, and he was the head of the Communist Party. And he actually staged a coup and in the 70s. And he was on his plane coming back from London to assume rule of the country as the president. And Gaddafi basically downed this plane and changed the whole spectrum of things. And this is a video of his trial. You can actually find that on YouTube. This is called Abdurrahman Sawar al-Dahab, who's considered also a grandfather. And he was the interim president of Sudan from 1985 to 1986. And he's considered a legend in the Arab world, mostly because he actually did his job. He actually gave power back to the people in a year. And that he's giving all sort of prizes just because he actually did his job and in Africa. And he was an Islamist. So I grew up with, you know, what is an Islamist? What is a communist? What does that mean? How, you know, what does that entail, really? In 1989, al-Bashir came to power under an Islamic rule, of course, and there was a huge brain drain in Sudan, actually from the 80s as well, from 1985. There was a lot of people that started leaving Sudan. But in 1989, when al-Bashir came to power, a lot of people had to leave because if you weren't with the party, then basically it's very hard for you to live and get a job and so on. And the economical situation was really bad, and it was, you know, also your ideology really kind of put you in a place of you're going to make a living or not. So there was a huge brain drain from professors to doctors to journalists to everyone that appreciated basically their, you know, their freedom and their safety and just, you know, about the life of their kids had to leave. And we ended up in Qatar, which is one of the smallest countries in the world, but the richest country in the world per capita. And that was, I think, an incredible step for me, because I went from being in Sudan with different kinds of Sudanese, black, white, different ethnic groups, different tribes, but everybody was Sudanese, mostly, to going to a country where I had 20 nationalities in my class, right? And you learn how to speak in Urdu, you know how to speak in Tagalog, you know how to speak in English, and you grow up with all these cultures around you. And but there's one thing you can't do, of course, is you can't talk about politics. So, and for me, I was very interested in politics because politics was the reason why I'm not home. And I want to know more about politics. And for me, just, you know, not being able to ask questions outside of my house and knowing why everyone was there. But what really attracted me was that the jokes were the same. So everybody, no matter where you're from, everyone had it's the same joke. So the people from Morocco had the same joke as the people from Syria and from us, and so and everybody accepted those jokes. So it was. I was like, oh, okay, this is a way that I can actually talk about that. And it really, you know, a little light bulb kind of went on. This is me and my father. So I grew up reading comics, a lot of comics, and it's mostly translated DC and Marvel comics, and they were translated in Lebanon or in Egypt. This one is translated in Iraq. That's why Superman has a mustache. And Wonder Woman is a guy. So it's so, you know, it's these comics had nothing to do with our reality. I mean, we grew up in a region where we didn't have heroes. Our politicians were corrupt. Our sportsmen was crap. We didn't have anybody to look up to. And even the comics that we read were not set in this world at all. The same thing with the comics that were written in the Arab world. They were very political. They were very made, you know, in a very propagandish way, if not a very childish way. So, you know, you couldn't have any reading material to explore your history or explore or just, you know, build yourself really. But comics really gave me an interest in art and in finding heroes, really. So when I was 16, I think, or 15, my father started buying or was buying, but it's the first time I actually noticed them. I think I was 16 years old, these magazines. This one is called Sabah al-Khair, which means good morning. And it's an Egyptian political cartoon-based magazine, something like the New Yorker, but in Arabic. And it's amazing. And for me, when I looked at the cartoons, it was everything that I wanted to do. You know, it was art, it was politics, and it was comics, and it spoke about sensitive issues, but in a way that was acceptable, in a way that, you know, the cartoonists criticized the government, criticized the regimes, but in a way that it was accepted that, you know, they didn't go to jail, basically, you know. So any cartoon that was made and put there was studied very much by the cartoonists. They're like, okay, I can do this, I can be sarcastic, and I'm not going to go to jail, my family's not going to be in trouble. There's a lot of things that you have to put in place for this to work, you know, like any other journalist. But the journalists, I think, were more, because, you know, it's very straightforward. That's why I think in the Arab world as a whole, nobody read, I think, the newspaper in all seriousness, because everyone knew about the censorship and knew about the propaganda of the first page. You know, it's always like the great leader did this and that, everything is great, everything is amazing. And then everyone just turns to the last page and reads the cartoon, because at least that's some truth in it. Reading those magazines, I started collecting a lot of, you know, cartoons, cutting them out, and discovering different styles. One of the people that I discovered was Najil Ali, and he's a Palestinian cartoonist that was assassinated in London in 1983. And what's really interesting is that nobody knows who assassinated him. Was it the Israelis or was it the Palestinians? And for me, that was exactly the point, that he was not biased. He was criticizing both sides. And the most important lesson, I think, from Najil Ali was that he's not funny. That I don't need to be funny. I don't need to be ha-ha funny. He's talking about a situation. And from there, I just started copying him, basically. And I remember, you know, as a young adult, just trying to copy and copy and copy. And one of the characters that's most well known in the Arab world is the character you see in front of you with his, you know, back facing us, and he's facing the situation, and his name is Handala. Handala in Arabic, in English, means sour, right? And that comes from looking at a sour situation. It's just to tell you how sour his cartoons are. And Handala is 10 years old, and he's always been 10 years old. And Najil Ali is 10 years old when he left the refugee camp. And I was 10 years old when I left Sudan. So for me, it's a lot of connections. And the way that he tells the message, and he uses poetry and very, very, very few words, and black and white, which I think is very important because sometimes you just need to see things in black and white. So I started copying, as you can see. And I went to school, I went to university, I had to study engineering because you cannot be an artist in the Arab world, of course, because you have to be, you have to be introduced by your parents as engineer so-and-so or doctor so-and-so. Otherwise, you're not going to get married. So I did architecture and design. And I worked in museums for years. And at that time, I just started to draw. And we're a generation that grew up in the internet. We fixed modems, and we had dial-up internet, and we waited for an hour for a picture to load, and so on. So we saw the evolution of the internet, and we used that in every way possible, because that, for us, that was the only space that we can actually communicate. It was the only space that we had visas to travel, right? When otherwise we wouldn't. It was the only space where we can meet people and have a discussion. It was our public space. And this went on. So it started with the forums, and then the blogs, and then of course social media came, and it was Facebook, and everybody had like, oh, this is my vacation pictures, and then it was Twitter. You have like 148 characters to tell me how you feel, and then it was Instagram. I just want to see pictures. I don't want to know how you feel. And then it was Snapchat. I just want to take selfies, and it was just like it just went on, And I kept working, basically jumping from one of those to the other. And of course, it started with Facebook, and I was just, putting my work out there, and I didn't know what to do with it. So I used to take it, and whenever I traveled, I just go to newspapers and say, hey, this is my work. I don't want money. I just want to get published, because it's really a circle. Like to get published, you have to be published, kind of thing. And I remember one day I got kicked out of an editor's office. He actually threw my profile in my face and my portfolio in my face, and he said, this is not going to work, because this is never going to get published because of censorship, and you're not funny. I said I'm not funny because the situation is not funny. I'm not trying to be funny. So. From that day, I thought about it. I was like, how many people are going to read this newspaper anyways, right? So I just went on Facebook. I made a page. I started putting my work on there. And through that, I met a lot of people that I think got kicked out of that editor's office, Editors, artists, writers, you name it, and everybody just started talking to each other and collaborating, and we had our own community, which of course led to a lot of political discussions, which later on, of course, led to what became known as the Arab Spring. And this happened. So the first day of the Arab Spring, I was in my office in the museum, and we saw the protests in Tunisia in December 2010, where a town in Tunis, a young man called Bouazizi, who was a university graduate, set himself on fire because he was selling fruits in front of a police station, and a policeman came out and slapped him in the face and confiscated all his fruits. Police brutality, of course. He was so angry that he set himself on fire. And that year, it was said that there was more than 6 people around the Arab world that set themselves on fire because of the same reason, give and take. So people took to the streets, and I remember watching Al Jazeera that day, and it was like a dream that people are on the streets. This is something that never happened, and at least I didn't witness it at all in my lifetime, because we were always told that this is never going to happen. These people are going to stay forever, and when they leave, their kids are going to come. When Mubarak leaves, his kid is going to come. When Hafez leaves, his kid is going to come, and Gaddafi, and so on. So when this started to happen, and Ben Ali escaped in a day or two, that was just, and the effect happened from there. So I made this cartoon, and it's not, this is actually my hand, and I took a picture of it, and I the finger, of course, is the Tunisian finger, Egypt, Sudan, and Algeria. And this was the first day. This was maybe the first hours of the Arab Spring. And protests happened in all of these countries. Some of them worked then, some of them worked now. This was all over the news, all over Wikipedia, right? And Wikimedia and blah, 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 and everybody's like asking me if they can use it and so on. And it was incredible for me that how my work was just getting shared. So it continued in that way, that I do something and then it gets shared and then people use it in whatever this country is. So this was in one of the Friday protests in Egypt, when Mubarak was supposed to step down and he didn't step down. And I made a cartoon of his face, and then next to it I wrote Masr, which means Egypt, of course. But if you read it with the tashkil, which is like the red calligraphy on it, it means it says Musir, which means insisting. So insisting to stay, basically. And I make all my work in black and white, and very simple, because I want it to be stenciled. I wanted other people to use it. My work is free. I never worked for a newspaper. This is all free online for you to use and to share under Creative Commons license. So from there, people started using it. This was graffitied in Tahrir Square. It was graffitied in Beirut, and from there, everywhere. So imagine sitting in my small studio in Doha, and my work is on the ground with people being shot at. I mean, I felt like this is part of me, and it is part of me. This is how we all grew, with the same anger that these people in the streets are angry about, and so on. This is one of my works in Yemen as well. This is in 2011, and this is one of the first actually Facebook pages from the revolutionaries. All of that, and I was trying to keep sort of anonymous. Like I didn't want to show my face. And the people at work, because at work I have a totally different name, which is my original name, which is Khalid Ali. And nobody had any idea that I was doing this on the side. And one day the New York Times actually shows up in my office and say, listen, we know it's you. And I was like, okay, I didn't I wasn't trying hard, obviously, but I wanted to do the whole Banksy thing. That didn't work at all. And so they published the article, and then the next day I'm just getting calls, and my email went like pop, 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 pop. All the people that kicked me out of their offices were like calling me like, hey, I would like to work. And my boss in the museum, she called and is like, is this you? How come we didn't know about this and all of that? So it was a whole new thing. People looked at me totally differently after that at work. So I guess it started from there as well. I'm just going to show you a few examples of works that maybe got circulated a lot and tell you a bit about it. This is one of the works. I think this was after Charlie Hebdo, and this is, of course, the world pointing at a man, telling him that you were the terrorists, and then the terrorists are pointing at the same man, telling him that you were the infidels. And the guy saying, I'm just a Muslim, which is really like 99.9% of Muslims, right? Because at the end of the day, we are the biggest victims of terrorism when you really think about it. So I made this cartoon, and right after Charlie Hebdo happened, and not because I'm in agreement with what Charlie Hebdo was doing or how they do things, especially as cartoonists, because the way I do cartoons and the way I think of use my power of freedom of speech is not the way that they do it. It's different, and we always had arguments, me and those cartoonists. But it was, for me, what really kind of upset me was the scene after the shooting. Of course, nobody deserves to die, but when the world leaders, quote unquote, walk together, holding hands after what happened in Paris, and they call for that we have to start fighting the terrorism and all of that. And these guys are the same exact reason that all of this is happening. And it's just the audacity, like, it was insulting. Like, it was very insulting that the same day, how many people died with your warplanes around the world. and you're here because you're in Paris, and because these are 12 French cartoonists, you all come here, the Palestinians and the Israelis and the, all of them walk together thinking that this is the thing that's gonna stop the world. So yeah, so I did this cartoon. And of course, the media always likes to label people. So I was the Muslim cartoonist. The Muslim cartoonists think this and that, and I was a Muslim cartoonist. And this is another cartoon that I've done, and it's about Syria. And this cartoon keeps reoccurring actually every couple of years. And every time I see it, I know something wrong happened. And this is as a political cartoonist, when you see your work getting showed again, it's not a good sign at all. Never. So this is called Choices for Syrian Children. And on the right, we have Alun Kurdi, who is a very famous picture of the kid that was found on the shores of Turkey. And then on the left, we have Amran Dingish, who was a very famous viral video of him in an ambulance after a building was basically collapsed on him, and he's dazed and bloodied. And that made me think about, this is what happens, of course, if you leave, and this is what happens if you stay. But we only know about these two images because they went viral, right? So it's really all about the internet culture, So this happened the next day, the next week, then it's gone. Whatever viral thing happened after that is going to be on the news, right? Because actually news became fashion. This is what's in fashion today. This is what's in fashion tomorrow. What did Trump say today? What did, it's all about that. And I think this is a huge part of how Trump actually became president, or who he is today, is because he gives us news, and news became entertainment, right? So the more you give us entertainment, the more we're like, yeah, okay, we're hooked on it, So this is where we are right now, because we think only in images. We let the internet tells us what's important. And I felt like I was part of that machine that makes people repeat what should be important or not. But this is not how we should think of things. And this is not the only things that happen to these Syrian children or any children in any war zone, actually. In between those pictures which were exactly a year apart, and probably right now, as we speak, these things are still happening. But we don't tweet about them, we don't talk about them, we don't post about them because they're not viral. So if you talk about something that like this is happening right now, people will think you're crazy. It's like, why are you talking about Syria right now? This was so last year, right? Nobody talks about Syria now. Around this time 2 years ago, everybody's talking about Syria, right? Nobody talks about Syria now. But it's the same things that are happening because we got bored, right? We get bored because it's entertainment now. It's not news. So now it was the Choices for Syrian Children cartoon. Now this became my name. And it's, of course, it just goes on. And Erdogan tweeted it. He's part of the problem. So I was like, you're not supposed to. So it just keeps going. This is me in Al Jazeera in shorts. Proud moment. So this is another cartoon that I'm going to talk about. This is I don't know if you guys remember this picture. Do you remember this picture? So this was in the south of France, where two armed policemen came to a woman and told her to take her clothes off. How crazy is that, right? They just came up to her and like, this is a beach, you have to take your clothes off. And this is the whole thing about the burkini, and you wear a burkini, you don't wear a burkini. And the coincidence was I was looking at the same, like this picture the same day, and it was a woman celebrating their town getting liberated from ISIS. And it really struck me that in both cases it was men telling women what to wear, and it doesn't matter if you're in France, or it doesn't matter if you're in Syria. It's the same exact situation. Armed men telling women what to wear. So I made the cartoon, and then again this whole thing started. But it became very like I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know if, and I still don't know actually. Is this what am I? How am I helping the situation, if any? So people look at this image, people know the story, and what? You know, so I became part of this machine that just, you know, it just keeps going. In 2015, I did a short documentary for The Guardian, and it was about human rights and civil rights. So a group of artists, we have an artist collective called Culture Runners, and we did a tour in the southern states, and we visited all the spaces where the civil movement was active. Because for us people that came from the Arab Spring, the civil rights movement worked. Right, because after all, there's a black president now. Now I don't know, but you know, there was Obama, and you know, so part of that, through that tour, of course, I think everybody remembers the image of the athletes in the 1968 Olympics in Atlanta with the black fist, and when I saw Colin Kaepernick, who's an American football player. The same year he started kneeling during the anthem, and that was huge in America. It's like, how can this guy kneel during the anthem? This is disrespectful. And he was kneeling during the anthem because he's protesting for police brutality and for blacks' rights and all of that. So for me, the continuation of that image in Atlanta is Colin Kaepernick now. And it's still the fight for the civil rights movement, and it's still the fight for the black power and the black fist. So I made this cartoon, which I basically just, you know, put the two together, and this just went insane. And a lot of people started using it. It was on the protests actually in New York and in DC. This is Chance the Rapper. I don't know if you guys know him. You know, American rappers were wearing T-shirts with my design on it. I didn't get paid for any of this, by the way. This is an image from Snoop Dogg. This is Dave Chappelle. And I became the Black Fist cartoonist. So this was my new name now. But of course, with all of that came a lot of trouble. And you know, during that, I was daily doing cartoons about whether the situation in Sudan or the situation in Egypt and what happened during the Arab Spring, and how we went and lived our 5 minutes of democracy, thinking about how we're going to rebuild this region that you know, colonialism, and then after that these dictatorships that are empowered by the same colonial forces kept us on leash for the last 30 years. And we lived a very few moments of freedom. And then they all came back stronger. And they took away the only thing that we had left, which was the internet. Right? So the internet, we always knew, like growing up in the Middle East, we always knew that we were watched. We always know, like, no, everybody tells you don't talk on the phone, don't, you know, like, don't talk to people you don't know. But the internet gave us that space, even though that we knew that we were, you know, it's still watched. And of course, after 9/11, basically the whole world's record, everything you ever typed is in a server somewhere owned by the NSA, right? So, but that's the only space that we had. We couldn't afford to say, oh, I'm going to boycott Facebook or I'm going to boycott the internet, because there's no other way, right? But after the Arab Spring, even that only space that we had was taken over. The companies that we trusted, like Facebook and Twitter and so on, became organizations that are for profit and more than anything else. And they work for those governments, they work for those agencies against activism and against people that have nowhere else but these spaces, right? I have tons of friends that were arrested for tweeting or for their jobs and for just stating their minds, basically. And it continues until today. Today, in the news, there was 3 Saudi spies that were in Twitter, and they were searching on, they were discovered on Twitter last year, and they were pushed by the new, of course, MBS, and they discovered all the information on all the dissidents. And they were the reason why Jamal Khashoggi was killed. So this is the world that we live in now. Like, the only space that we had is gone. And they discovered that, and they became more powerful, using trolls, in Sudan we had something called electronic Mujahideen, and it was a whole department just to do that. So I was arrested in Cairo, and it was funny afterwards. During it was not funny at all. The same thing in Bahrain, and I was getting a lot of course, trouble with the Sudanese government and so on. So I ended up going to Copenhagen now. I'm there on the artist residency for artists and writers at risk. It's a very small organization that does incredible work with more than saving 200 writers and from all over the world. But that's also problematic because they pick and choose people. We have whole countries that are under siege basically. But what are we going to do? And of course we're always looked at as poster boys. Like, oh look, we saved another one. He's great. He's black. He's Muslim. So how good are we? But we're trying to kind of change that into. We're not victims. We're actually survivors. We pushed to be here, and we're ambassadors of these people that you don't see. Right? So this is what we're trying to do now with everything that's going on. So what happened with the internet and what's happening around us and the control that happened, I tried to step back and see what can happen. What can I do outside of this internet? Because it's gone. We lost it, right? We definitely lost that battle. So I started working in more projects. So, cartooning for me was a way to deliver things, because to talk about politics or to talk about things that I wanted to talk about, because when you tell someone I'm a cartoonist, they smile. And that's a good introduction, right? So for me, I started doing everything I actually can do to get those messages out there, whether it's with cartoons or whether it's with film or whether it's with projects. This is a 7-minute film. I don't know if you have time to show it. Do we? No? Okay. Well, maybe later. Maybe at the end. All right. So this film was basically, most refugees use WhatsApp, right? And they film their trips crossing the Mediterranean, and we always get those videos on people just send them and they're like, oh, this is a guy or whatever, and it became so normal that, because we see it, it's like a second and it's gone. Just like the other news, right? Just like, and it's gone. So for me, I wanted to put it together, like all these videos, just put them together in one thing and make people really think about these gruesome videos that we see of people crossing the Mediterranean and filming it. And for me, that was incredible that people are filming this trip and they don't even know if they're going to make it alive. How powerful is that? It's like a message in a bottle. I don't even know if I'm going to make it, but I'm filming it. So I basically made this film, and I asked people to send me videos of refugees at sea, and people send me a lot of videos, and we put it together and we made a 7-minute film of like kind of a day at sea. And I started working on other projects as well. As I said, I lived in Doha for most of my life, and in Doha there's 4 million people. The population is 4 million. 1.5 probably is migrant workers from Nepal and from Southeast Asia. And all of them basically live in camps outside because most of them are male. And it again, they don't know what to do with that system. How do we do this? How do we become this great nation without having slaves, basically? So they're trying to work that system out. But while they're trying to work that system out, there's a lot of people that are shunned, and we're all under the same system in the Gulf, anyways. Because it's the difference between me and a laborer in Doha is that I just have a few thousand better salary. That's it. But we're all under the same control of the same system. So what happened was that what I hate is being unseen. I really hate that, and I'm a 6'6" black guy, and sometimes people don't see me because they're scared of me I'm walking with a friend of mine, and on the Corniche, and that's where I work. The museum is right there, and there was a worker, and on Friday, basically it's like Sunday, right? So on Friday, that's their only day off. So they go to Corniche. Everybody has to go to Corniche. This is where they meet. And they go to the Corniche, and they're dressed up, you know, super dressed up, fashionable, amazing. And I was there with a friend of mine walking, and there was this one of the workers who was wearing a Tupac T-shirt, and you know I like Tupac, and I was like, hey man, this guy's wearing a nice T-shirt, and he just laughed. He didn't even look at the guy, and I think that situation comes from feeling helpless because he doesn't know how to fix the situation, so he just doesn't see it. And I thought, I was like, okay, how can I make things connect with people? Like, how do I connect this? And Doha has a 7-star city. Everybody's dressed up. There's 1,000 malls. Everybody's like, you know, has a Bentley and shit. So it's like, I thought fashion would connect people, you know, and there's a fashion school and so on. So I said, okay, I'm going to make this program that I'm going to ask people to come to the Corniche on Friday. And if they see someone that looks nice, they like fashion, you like fashion, and have a chat, take pictures, and let's post it. Let's do something about that. Nobody responded at all. And I ended up doing it with a friend of mine. Her name is Aparna. She's an Indian photographer. She's an amazing photographer. And basically, if we see something that, you know, a guy that looks nice or a girl that looks nice, we walk up to them and we ask them, hey, do you like fashion? And their face lights up because basically they're in the overall for a week. This is the only chance where they can express themselves. It's that day, you know? So when you walk up to them, it's like, I see you. It's incredible, you know? And it's always like us and them and stuff. But, you know, and of course the language is a problem. There's a lot of things that we had to put into this. So I created Doha Fashion Fridays, and we basically go and we meet people that look nice and we talk about fashion. I have no idea about fashion. I just, you know, I try to just make it a thing and tell their stories. Like, who are they? What, you know, what are you doing? How did you get here? And all of that. And it created a really nice atmosphere. And, you know, we started. Actually, I went with Mina once to the camp. Remember that? Mina used to work in Doha. She's a good friend of mine, and she took me to the camp. And but it was their day off, so everybody was at the Corniche. So it was not really a smart move. And the project got copied, and now it's in Kuwait. And so it's happening. So think of it as a cross between Humans of New York and a fashion blog. You know, so it's just about like discovering personalities and so on. This is another project that I've been working on. It's also about fighting, you know, sharing economy and finding something that we could do together and finding space rather than the internet. This is called Fada. Fada in Arabic means space, and it's all about donating spaces or facilities to your community at your convenience, basically. So if you have anything, your guitar, your father's library, a garage, a 3D printer, you can say, I want to donate this printer every Wednesday from 3 to 5 to university students. And then you get requests on it. And it's all about hosting artists, and it's absolutely free to use and to share and so on. So I did this project with Open Society Foundation, and you know, we just launched it like 3 months ago. So please use it. It's a free tool to organize giving and sharing economy. And I did a book in this year that I was in Copenhagen. The book is here somewhere. The book is outside. Buy it. And now I'm working, actually we're launching this. This is my second book. It's called Sudan Retold. And I worked, 2 years ago, I worked in Sudan with Goethe Institute with 31 creatives about retelling the history of Sudan. Artists retelling the history of Sudan. One of our biggest problems is that we don't know our history, and we should know our history. Our history is mostly oral, and retelling those stories in whatever medium that you could. It's an amazing book. We had a cook, we had a musician, we had comic book artists, we had illustrators, we had poets, and it's a beautiful, colorful book about stories from Sudan, from different parts of Sudan that nobody heard of, including Sudanese people. So I'm really trying to work more on the ground while still doing cartoons, but mostly for me, it's reaching people, reaching out to people and trying to figure out what can we do together to resist I was burned out. I was working for 8 years continuously, and I'm tired. All my friends that came from the same situation are tired, and you know we believe now, after we all basically crashed, that the only way to fight this, because we all came to realize that we're never going to win. They're the establishment, they have the money, they have the time. We don't have any of that. So for us to go on, we have to pass the torch. To pass the torch, we have to do it through projects like this. So work with the younger generation in projects like this stuff. I'm working on trying to rebuild the public library in Sudan and get more people to do more things. Thank you very much.
Please have a seat. Thank you so much for your stories, and it's so inspiring to hear, and there are loads of topics, and that's why we don't have time now for the film. I want to close it off, but you told us a lot, and I want to have... No, you didn't. You didn't at all. There are a couple of topics that I want to go back to from the speech, and a couple of questions that I have. I'm so surprised not many people know about Sudan, even in Sudan. Why is that?
I think it's our education system, mostly, and I think the people that were in charge at the time, because it's very political. At the time of independence, I think Sudan was pushed more to be more Arabized, and so they pushed more into that narrative, and ignored most of the rest of Sudan, actually, right. Most of the ethnic groups as well. So I think there's a lot of stories to be told, and the issue is knowing ourselves as well, because there's a huge question of Sudan is what are we? Are we Arab? Are we African? What are we? And it's a simple question, but it broke the nation, right? And
that was the base of that referendum as well.
And it's the base of that referendum. But you have to remember that this is a made-up country, just like all the countries around it.
Of course.
So it's trying to find an identity to keep it together, because this is kind of like the situation that we found ourselves in.
But is it necessary to keep Sudan together?
That's the question. That's why the South broke up. When I see the map of Sudan now without the South, it really affects me, right? Because I think it's beautiful to be together and try to make something beautiful, right? But it's a lot of geopolitics. It's a lot of history, and it's a lot of trauma that was involved in the South-North relation. Of course, with the involvement of the colonial powers. So it's a situation.
Could it be part of the start of getting rid of the past and creating a new future?
I think now with the civil government that's in place right now, there's a lot of talk about having a federation or trying to figure out, because South Sudan is a very young country, and so is Sudan, right? But I think, united we will be better. I mean, not only with South Sudan. I think Africa as a whole. I mean, we could do better if we all just work together. Right. So it's something as simple as freedom of travel, or freedom of movement, as it could really change the whole economy of the continent.
Which is very problematic. Even the passport that you have decides where you can easily go or not.
Absolutely.
There's, like I said, many topics, so I'm going to go there in the overview. You closed off with a statement which was, in my perception, quite bleak. We're never going to win. That was kind of shocking I can imagine, to have that realization, but to find the power to continue. How do you find that power to continue?
I don't have the power to continue. It's hard. It's really hard. I mean, because a lot of people are not doing this for money, and we don't have the backing to do this, right? So you find yourself, you're fighting a machine, and it's way bigger than you. And what I think this machine did best was keep us apart, right? So we're fighting individually, but with some organizations helping activists. But that's not enough, because at the end of the day, these organizations themselves need funding from the same governments that are selling weapons to these people. So it's like it's like a circle, and that's why now, like, basically, Trump just cut funding to UNESCO or cut funding to UNRWA and the Palestinians, and he said, okay, you know what, no more money.
But again, you're here. You're talking about the ideas. You published a book. You do continue.
Yes, but I think it's passing the torch is very important, and
to whom?
To the young generation that we're making. We have to make someone. We have to make new generation. Like, it took us 20 years to find ourselves. We didn't know what activism meant. I had no idea what activism meant. We were just doing things that we were doing. When people started calling, oh, this is an activist, I had a hard time calling myself an artist, because I thought that's a big title. Right. So I think it's we are at a time right now where things are so fast, and the age of populism and it's authoritarianism is on a highest level now. Even in the democratic countries in the West, right? So, like it's very hard. So I think we need to have that grassroots more like it than fight individually.
You're very critical of the system that involves politics, leadership as well, funding, and global economical systems. Are we ever going to change that?
I don't know, but we should keep going in a way that we always have the chance to do that. And I think the most powerful thing is knowledge. That's why I'm trying to build this library, right? Because in Sudan, for example, people love reading. They had an open book show called Mafroush. Mafroush literally means on the floor, right? And people just brought their books. People sold, people exchanged books, and it was incredible. The next time they did it, the government came and confiscated all the books, right? So this just tells you how scared they are of people having that knowledge, and just talking to each other and gathering. Right. So it's continuous now. But the thing is, like, how do we connect to do these things? People need a space. People need that public square. Right. And we don't have that. We don't have that public square.
But that's what startled me as well, because the virtual public square that we had, the internet, which was a great source for you to reach an audience, to be a part of the Arabic Revolution, Arabic Spring, so to speak. Is that really gone?
The internet?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's gone. There's websites and platforms within that are working, but Facebook plan is basically to become the internet.
Yeah.
Right, and it is happening. So WhatsApp, Instagram, and Facebook are owned by Mark. Right, so it's
but then we have to find new ways, because
we have to find new ways, exactly. But until we find these new ways, what are we going to do?
Use the system as it is.
Use the system as it is, but back up and look at it and know it. Like that's my issue. You
Realize
need to know.
it. Yeah.
You need to know what's happening.
Yeah.
Right. A lot of people don't know. A lot of people think, especially here in the West, a lot of people think, no, this is a conspiracy theory. Our phones are not tapped. And Angela Merkel's phone was tapped by the NSA. So it's everyone, literally.
But I've got nothing to hide, so I'm saying.
Exactly. That's exactly the mistake that everybody makes. If you say I have nothing to hide and I don't care, then you're compromising your own privacy and everybody's privacy. They don't. Who watches the Watchmen at the end of the day? That's the question.
Yeah. Another statement that you made that maybe you should evolve a little bit in as well is that it was a statement that made me think of Ralph Allison's novel The Invisible Man, because you're a 6'6" guy, but people don't see you. I think elaboration on that is interesting. Why do you think that people do not see you? And is it a literal way of seeing you or a figure of speech? What do you mean by that?
So as cartoonists, we work a lot with stereotyping, right? So if I want to draw whatever, I'll just make this is how this person will generally look like, because I want people to recognize that this is how this, this is this person, or this is this culture, or this is whatever. So the general image of people that look like me, if I'm walking at night next to you,
it's scary, man.
Yeah. So that's
that's a stereotypical idea.
Exactly.
Of,
so our mission is to change that, stereotyping, right?
But then again,
and it's what Edward Said spoke about, Orientalism and so on. I mean, it's just this is how you are perceived, whether as a black man or as a Muslim or whatever your identification is, to the media, to the mass media, which is really how people see you. And this is part of why I made this book, because I want people to see us in a different way. I want us to see us in a different way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's people in Sudan, people are always upset, like, this is like the Arabs don't know we're Arab, and the Africans don't know we're African, and we're really like stuck in that, but we really need to know first and accept these two things for us to move forward with our life, and then the Arabs will realize, and the Africans will realize. We need to figure out what do we want first and who we are, and be proud of all of that as a package.
About what you want, you're based in Copenhagen right now. Is that also the place where you want to be?
Unfortunately, I don't have a choice.
No, but if you had a choice, where would you be?
I'll be in Sudan.
Doing
I'm
what?
going to Sudan.
And doing what?
I'll be building that library.
And you are going to go there as well. Yeah, great. Damn, so many. Yeah, that's the thing. That's the thing. If you go back to Sudan, the country is not the same as you left it. First of all, to start, can you say anything about Sudan while you're not while not living there?
Yes, I mean, I always thought about that. Like when I do cartoons about the political situation there, I don't really know the details of everyday life. So it's very hard for me to do a cartoon that the normal person can identify. So mostly the people that know my work in Sudan are a certain class, right? So that and actually I don't do cartoons about Sudan for Sudan. I do cartoons about Sudan for the world, to realize what's happening in Sudan, because you wouldn't get news about Sudan anywhere else. So I would do something like Kaepernick. A lot of people know that, and and then the next cartoon will be about Sudan, and then we're like, oh, okay, there's a country called Sudan. This is happening in it, and then I'll get the information out there.
Because the information is quite sparse about Sudan, and there were two moments this year where we all of a sudden got a focus on what was happening in Sudan.
Right.
And first time was in April when Ala Salah, the picture of the woman in white who was dressed as, who was called a queen, like you said, Kandaka. That spread through social media as well. I think we do have a picture of that. Yeah, this is this picture. I mean, you just said indeed that the internet, as this free space, is gone. But her picture got viral, so we knew about Sudan. What do you think about that fact, about her going viral, and what do you think about her as well?
The picture going viral, I think that's just the media. I mean, the picture is beautiful, and it has all the elements that any front page will want. And it shows, how powerful it is, and how powerful she is. I think it's good for us that the picture went viral. And I think she took on that responsibility very well, because she didn't think of it as internet fame. She thought of it more as, this is a chance for me to do something, even if I wasn't fully involved in the protest, like as many people say, like, oh, she didn't come every day to the protest, or she didn't do this. But matter of fact that she came and she did something, and it took a life of its own, and that's what happens on the internet. But I love what she's done with that. She didn't make it about herself. She made it about what happened. She made it about women empowerment. She made it about the situation in Sudan. just a few days ago or last week, she was in the UN.
Right, just a technical issue being resolved. She was in the UN, and the way she found responsibility. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
The way she took the responsibility for her actions is something that you can appreciate.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's very selfless of her. She used it because at the end of the day, this is how I'm here. Mm-hmm. You know, if the New York Times didn't write their article, I wouldn't be here.
Right.
Right. So at the end of the day, we do need that media. We do need that Western exposure, sadly, but that's how the world is, right? So we take it, but we give them our story, right? If you read the amount of wrong information that the media writes about me, because this is what they have in mind, a refugee came from blah, 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 right? And, I'm not a refugee, at least not yet. So, but they like to romanticize things, right? And, but I don't mind. Let them write whatever they want. And as long as I get my message through, whatever.
And is that also the reason?
They sell their newspaper, and I get my information through.
Yeah. And is that also the reason, am I being amplified? Very good. This is also the reason why you're so quite relaxed about people taking your work, because your image of Colin Kaepernick turned into a T-shirt. People are copying the Fridays, Fashion Fridays in Kuwait. Mm-hmm. Is that a thing that art is there to share?
Absolutely. I think in a huge part of the world, not a lot of people have the privilege of owning things, whether it's physical things or even knowledge, right? So I think open source and open knowledge is very important for our culture to grow. And the more you share, the more other people will share. Yeah. Right. And there's a we have a huge tree in our backyard in Sudan, and no other tree is like it in the house. So I asked my aunt, I was like, why is this tree bigger than the other ones? And she's like, if you give it tree space, it will grow. And it's a very simple thing, but it really clicked with me, because if you give it space, it will grow. And this is what happens with if you give knowledge, if you give information, if you share what you have, then this will grow.
My final question. It was a very moving year for Sudan this year. Al-Bashir was removed. What, if you could predict it, what is the future of Sudan? The immediate future, where does it go?
I think
I'll just use this one for now, right? Okay.
I think what happened was incredible, very brave from a lot of young women. So what happened in Sudan is that, Al-Bashir for 30 years was fighting three things: unions, workers' unions, art, and women. And these three things came back and bit him. Yeah. This is exactly what happened. And for the situation to continue with all the geopolitical situation that's happening now in the region, we have to feed these three things, right? And the issue with that, not only in Sudan, in everywhere, that the organizations that are supposed to help with these things only help when there's a catastrophe, right? When things are finally okay, people just move on to go to the next catastrophe. Right. So now, if you talk about Sudan, everybody's like, no, but we're like Lebanon, Iraq. This is where the fashion is now. Yeah. Right. But I'm like, yeah, great. But these guys, the women, the empowerment,
just still there.
Yeah. We'll come back. So it's like now I can't find funding for like the smallest thing. Because now but it's I understand, of course, the organizations have limited funding and they need, they can't help everybody at the same time. But this is a time to grow, and if you want democracy and for Sudan to be the model that it is in terms of peaceful protesting and a peaceful revolution, you need to help these three things.
Yeah. Clear. We could talk for hours, which we don't have time for now. So thank you for now. We'll return to you in a bit. But first, you can sit over there, but you can stay here as well. Whatever you want. It's your evening. No, we will talk later some more. And before we continue our conversation and add Pravini to our panel, we would like to see a clip of a film that Pravini made, The Uprising. The film is a music documentary. And it tells the story of racism, the fight against racism in Europe. And there are commentary and experiences from academics and activists. And like I said, Pravini Baboeram is here. And she offers a decolonial perspective on the anti-racism movement in the Netherlands, UK and France. Let's just watch a clip of that.
The true debate is about the consequences of colonialism.
And we've been sounding the alarms, if you will, to Europe to recognize for itself how it continues to delude itself.
So the first thing is to recognize that the narrative is incomplete.
Yeah, we don't speak about slavery. We don't speak about, in general, about the colonial past.
They say black people have come to Europe because Europe is civilized, Christian, advanced.
We zijn natuurlijk niet hier zomaar vanzelfsprekend. Dat is natuurlijk met dank aan het kolonialisme en de slavernij.
Black people are in Europe because Europe was in Africa. Black people are in Europe because Europe was in the Americas and kidnapped and transported millions of Africans to the Americas.
We are part of French history, not because we wanted it, but because we had no choice.
Het is heel kwalijk. Omdat je ziet natuurlijk dat de Nederlandse samenleving dat totaal niet weten.
This is why very often I'm not speaking about people with an immigrant background, but people with a colonial background.
So what I say to people when they say, why are you here? I say, we are here because you were there.
We hebben het inmiddels over een groep mensen die hier is geboren en getogen en nog steeds wordt aangeduid als de buitenlander, allochtoon of de vreemdeling.
So historical narrative becomes a way not only to shape the past, but actually to also shape the worldview and the understanding of future generations.
Your view of the world is conditioned by what you have been taught to see.
The basis for this Palestinian narrative that is being told is that Arabs and Muslims, they are terrorists, they are bad.
Okay, we know that Muslims, that Islam is not terrorism, but still you have to say it explicitly in order to make things clear. There's always this suspicion.
And this is also where the discussion needs to go. It's about how does democracy look for people of color in this country?
What are the facts? Wait, do they even matter? I see your implicit bias is a heavy factor. Always hear you talk, but you listen never ever. That's a recipe for creating a new disaster. You really up, tell them what they want, yup. Give another fake remedy to make it better. How can you be happy when the rest is feeling sad? Unity ain't happening when we're not in it together. Not in it together. Not in it together. Not in it together.
Western civilization loves to claim its achievements as their own and its failures as the human. So they will say, oh, we the human, we're so destructive of life. I'm sorry, no. Human beings have been here for thousands of years and they have reproduced life in the planet without any problem. All the previous civilization with all the critics did not destroy life in the planet like this one.
When they colonized Asia, they mismanaged the whole ecological system there, and that costed 30 to 60 million deaths.
And no other civilization in the history of the world has caused as much death and destruction as this one.
And so this is not a problem of the human, this is a problem of a particular civilization.
And it proclaimed to be universal.
Clip from the film, the documentary, The Uprising, made by Pravini. Yes, am I amplified now? Yes. I'll just choose, you know what, I'll just choose this one, yeah? Okay, I'm very confused right now. And Pravini Baboeram is here as well. She's an artist and an activist, creating art to contribute to social change. She's a co-founder of Action Committee. Holi is not a house party. Does anybody know about that? Because that's quite interesting. It protests against the appropriation of the Hindu Spring Festival Holi. And she's also the initiator of the Anti-Racism Guide. In 2019, so this year, she will release a new album. You heard the music in the documentary as well. And the documentary is combined called The Uprising. Please give a warm hand to Pravini Baboeram. Just have a seat. Khalid, please join us as well. Wow, I think that's a very, very powerful film. Can you tell us a little bit about the context of the film? And in the meantime, I will make sure. You have some water.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Khalid, for your amazing story.
Was that you rapping?
Yes.
That's amazing.
Thank you. So yeah, The Uprising is based on also the album, and it consists of 9 chapters that kind of reflect a social movement. And the reason why I wanted to make this film is actually a lot of the questions that you raised in terms of how do you engage people, you know, in complex issues, make it accessible, and music and film was, for me, the way to do it. And what I wanted to do was to tell a story that is told by people of color in a way that reflects the way we view the world. Because sometimes, especially when it comes to racism, we tend to make white people comfortable in order to have that conversation. But
can you explain that? Because a lot of people do not understand that concept. What do we mean by making white people comfortable in order to have the conversation about racism?
Well, I think, you know, Zwarte Piet is a good example. You know, if you say Zwarte Piet is racism, then it's like, but I'm not racist. So there's directly a link to people taking it personal. And then it shuts down the conversation because, you know, you don't want to offend people. And the approach that I wanted to take was to take it to an institutional level, where we're not talking about individuals, but how individuals are part of a bigger system that does affect, you know, communities. And so I made the film to kind of reflect a collective story. I interviewed 13 academics and activists, and you saw many of them in the clip just now. And I wanted to show how there's a collective struggle with different types of oppressions, but all fighting the same system, including the one, you know, that you described. So I think in that sense, there are a lot of parallels for, you know, communities of color where no matter where you are, we are still dealing with the colonial legacy.
Right. You went to the UK, to France and to Holland. I reckon there are quite a lot of similarities, and we'll see that in the film as well. But are there some contradictions as well? The situation in the UK, in what way does it differ from the situation in France about racism or anti-racism? And in what do they both differ from the situation in Holland?
Well, some of the things that are discussed in the film is the types of emphasis in the narrative. So, you know, the narrative all these nations have in common is the idea of bringing civilization to, you know, people who are supposedly uncivilized. And, you know, the idea of the golden age where, you know, we tend to forget the pillaging and plundering that happened in order to create the golden age. And one of the things that is being discussed is how in the UK there's more an emphasis on the abolition movement, where, you know, there was slavery was abolished because, you know, people thought it was the right thing to do and not because it was economically interesting. In the Netherlands, the narrative is we weren't involved in a big way, so, you know, we were just a small part. So it doesn't matter, you know, how big or small it is. Yeah, so it's not about whether you had to be involved at all, but no, it's just a small part. And in France, the idea of égalité, fraternité, liberté. So, you know, being kind of colorblind when we have, you know, a context that is in fact based on, the idea of race.
Right.
So, and these are the differences in narratives, but yeah, the effect is still the same.
Right. Some people could say that the way you approach the problem actually polarizes. You're part of polarization.
Mm-hmm.
And you're smiling while I say that.
Hey.
What do you say about that? It's an accusation.
Well, one of the people in the film says when it's people of color, they call it polarization, and when it's white people, they call it a debate. It depends on how you look at it.
Right. Khalid, how do you saw the clip as well? How do you view this topic as well, the anti-racism movement, and how people respond to that?
It's really interesting because, in Sudan, I'm considered the oppressor because I'm considered an Arab in the social kind of makeup in Sudan, but outside I'm considered the oppressed. Right, so it's really interesting to see both sides of the coin, definitely, and I find myself sometimes I was talking to she's a great friend of mine now, and I met her in an airport in DC, I think, and she's South Sudanese. And I went up to her and was like, "You're South Sudanese. How you doing? I'm a Sudani. I'm from Sudan." And she's like, "Okay," and I'm like, "Yeah, I have a lot of South Sudanese friends. My uncle is married to a South Sudanese." Like, I felt like, I have a lot of black friends. It's like
that's the same thing as I've got a lot of black friends as well. My aunt is married.
Did I just say that? It was.
I'm not racist.
Yeah, exactly. And so it was. So it's really interesting seeing both sides because in a lot of times you feel that you're not part of that story. You don't want to be part of that story, but you are, and you discuss it. And it's really interesting when you're trying to talk to like old folks in Sudan about you shouldn't say this. So now when I see you shouldn't talk about racism, you shouldn't call, you shouldn't say the word or whatever, and now when I see white people, I totally know they're saying it. I'm like, I know what you're saying, it's fine, right? Because it's, dude, you were there when Hitler was here. It's fine. It's just, it was normal, So for me, I get upset when young people are like that. That's why I'm upset. Because you shouldn't be like that now. You have all the media, you have all the information, you have people around you that tells you that you should not be like that, right? Because it tells you that this is not the right way to act. But if you're from that generation, some people just don't change, right? Like you get to a certain age and this is what you think, and you're there, So I'm totally fine with old racist people. Totally fine with that.
But young racist people, that's a problem.
Young racist people, I have a problem, But old racist people, it's expected. What do you think, So
it's almost saying they don't know any better, but I don't know whether you're saying exactly that.
I understand. That's what I'm saying. I understand. It's fine. I'm not going to take it.
Yeah.
But I understand what you're why you're like that, and I get it.
Part of the narrative of that generation, and we experience that in Holland as well, is that a lot of people say you should be thankful. You should be thankful that you're here, that you can enjoy all the benefits of the West. That's something you encounter as well, right?
Yes. And I think that is, part of the narrative is to, again, be thankful for this idea of civilization. And I think, what I try to show in the film is that we question and challenge the whole idea of Western civilization. How can you call something a civilization that has destroyed so many things? And I think that also relates to the stories that are being told. And retelling the story is to kind of, provide a different lens because it's considered a universal lens to say it's civilization. But it really depends on the perspective you take, and I really wanted to show that there are different perspectives, and that we should, at least take note of it and not assume that your view of the world is the way that everyone views the world.
But by living here, you're part of the system, and so you are part of the problem as well.
Well, I don't think that if you're part of the system, you're necessarily a part of the problem, because it depends on how you move within that system. And I agree that, you know, being born and raised in the Netherlands, I have the privileges that a lot of that people in the global south don't have. And so I ask myself the question, what can we do to be in solidarity with people? What can we do with the privileges we do have? What can we do to, you know, unite and challenge the system from within? But
how do you do that? Because, and that's a question I want to ask you as well, art has its limitations. It's amazing that you made this film. It's amazing that you made music. But is it really going to change the world?
Do you want to?
No, I'm asking you first.
Well, I think it's interesting that you asked the question if art has limitations, because what has been happening so far hasn't changed. So that is, you know, that already shows the limitation. And I think what artists have is the gift of imagination, you know, of thinking outside the box and thinking of new ways to live together. And, you know, and I totally agree with Khalid that we will not solve it in this generation. And so we need to ensure that we provide the tools and the ideas for the next generation to imagine what the future can look like. Because, you know, if you fight a system that has been, you know, instituted for 500 years, we cannot expect to change that within the coming 10 years. So we need to think of a strategy that is intergenerational.
What are the limitations of art for you?
I think it's just like anything else. We don't. I think artists need to reinvent themselves, and find new ways to deliver whatever they want to deliver. And I think it's, as I said, you know, you need to, you know, I think it's creative resistance. As I mentioned before, you have to be creative. You have to find, you know, new ways. You have to, you know, think in new ways. You have to, you know, find more knowledge and more resources and more ways to connect, because it's all about connecting. You know, it's all about finding, you know, this is where it is right now. Why don't we do that? Like this is music, or this is whatever fits that situation, I think.
Going back to the question I asked previous, and then I will open it up to the audience. Being thankful, you should be thankful for Copenhagen to save you, and you cannot ever be critical to the system because it saved you. So your gratitude has to be bigger than your artistic intuition.
I mean, for me, I think I am grateful for Copenhagen for a lot of things. You know, I've read so many books in their libraries since I got there, and I'm enjoying it. And I saw a different world, and I got a chance to talk to a different audience. You know, because it's my job as an artist is not to, especially as a political cartoonist, I think it's unbelievably annoying to talk to people that agree with you all the time, you know, and this is really what, you know, what that the internet has become now, right? Because of the algorithms, I'm just talking to people that agree with me all the time. You know, when you like my work, you're supposed to like my work. Right? The computer knew that you're gonna like my work. That's why you saw it. Right? So for me, that defeats the purpose. You know, I had a show in the Arab American Museum in Dearborn, New York, Dearborn in Detroit, which is the biggest population of Arabs outside of the Arab world, right? And first of all, I think that's a wrong location for that museum, because nobody else goes there but Arab people, you know? And the second thing is that, you know, I had the show there and everybody was just like, you know, like nodding their head. I'm like, oh, this is great. Yeah, this is great. And everybody's just like, yeah, this is great. I'm like, yeah, you shouldn't be here. You know, like this is not working. Like I'm not doing this for us to all just shake hands and say how great we are. You know, we're supposed to have some sort of a debate, you know, or talk about it, or like disagree with, you know, or something. So yeah.
And that doesn't happen in Copenhagen.
That happens in Copenhagen.
It does.
That happens in Copenhagen. And part of the reason why I was invited to Copenhagen was because of the Danish cartoons, Prophet Muhammad cartoons, you know. So, you know, I'm there to basically counter that narrative, you know. They thought I'm going to be with that narrative, but, you know, surprise. And, you know, so it was...
Well, because
I was not invited to a lot of things
after
they found out.
What do you think about the cartoons of Allah that were
Of
made?
Muhammad.
Muhammad.
It was you know, it's I think it's just a colonialist way to look at things, really.
Why?
Because, you know, so what are you drawing about? Like now all you have to do is draw a prophet, like a cartoon about Prophet Muhammad, and then instantly you become a sensation, right? Like you have police protecting you and you're the bravest person in the world, you know? But, you know, I know a lot of cartoonists that die for way less reasons, right? And are in jail for way less reasons than drawing anything. And for them to understand the situation, like I had a lot of conversation with these cartoonists and other cartoonists about what it is. Like in Islam, there's a lot of drawings for Prophet Muhammad, a lot of it. So it's not really about the drawings, right? It's about who's drawing them, right? I remember I had this conversation with a taxi driver once, right? And this old Pakistani guy. And, you know, he's talking about the, you know, cartoons, like, oh, Prophet Muhammad cartoons, and this is disrespectful. I was like, so why are you angry? He's like, I'm angry because it's the same people that took my land, took the oil, installed a dictator, and now they have, you know, we don't have anybody, and that's the only person that we actually have respect to, and they're taking that person and making fun of because they can. That's all what this is about, is that I can do this, so I'm going to do it. I don't care if 3 billion Muslims are hurt, but I'm going to do it because I can, and it's my right to do it. Of course it's your right to do it. Nobody said you can't do it. But why? Is the reason because you can? Of course you can. Of course you can, right? You live in a first world country. You can do whatever the hell you want, and like anything. You can do anything. Is your whole complex is like this is your only problem right now? You know, that's how I look at it. You know, we're fighting a fight to bring people together, and when you do something that destroys these bridges, you know, this is not what I'm working for. So I don't respect it.
To be devil's advocate, like you said, you're done with making white people feel comfortable, so you raise difficult subjects. Why should people, again, devil's advocate, why should people make Muslims comfortable? If you want to raise a topic, you can do that by drawing a cartoon of Muhammad.
Absolutely, absolutely. But, you know, the good thing about censorship,
The good thing about censorship.
I'm
very curious.
Is creativity.
And in a sense, how to go
how
around.
to talk about a situation without being, what's the word? Yani, abusive. Exactly. If like start a conversation, not being direct. That's the dumbest kind of cartoons. That's the dumbest kind of conversation, right? If I want to start a conversation about Islam, if I want to start a conversation about Prophet Muhammad, do I come up to you and have a conversation with a smile on my face and say, hey, let's talk about this? Or I come up to you and say, listen, your prophet is a pedophile, and I think you're dumb, and 3 other billion people are dumb, and I'm smart.
And I think it's also, you know, what sometimes is missing from these types of devil's advocate questions is the power dynamics, you know, just like you said. Exactly. I mean, a lot of people of color are making people uncomfortable because that is our daily state. We're uncomfortable with the way the world and the West treats us. And so if the oppressor then wants to make us uncomfortable, it's actually part of oppression, not
but
part
what
of
do you say
trying
that to people? I mean, I do understand you. Again, devil's advocate, because that's my role. What do you say to people who say, you don't have to live here? If you feel oppressed by people, you can always go away.
Well, I mean, I can say the same for, you know, the people who were born and raised here just like me.
But I don't feel oppressed, so I'm fine.
Yeah.
You feel oppressed, so you've got a problem.
I mean,
I don't have a problem.
This is now, I think, a discussion about ethics. Because, yeah, technically, indeed, if it doesn't suit me here, then I can go. But what does that say about your moral principles and the idea of a tolerant and inclusive society? Because if I don't agree with you, then I have to leave? You know, what type of freedom is that? So that's why I think it's really, really important to critically reflect on the type of freedom we tend or claim to have, because if that means that I have to leave, then it's not freedom.
And the type of freedom you can give others too. Right. I would give the opportunity to the audience to ask questions, and then we will find out as well if you're surrounded by like-minded people who only agree with you. Is there anybody with a question? Nobody at all. Yeah.
Let me then start a discussion. Well, thank you very much. I found a number of both. You had a number of remarks on the role of art, on the creativity. I was so fortunate to live in Egypt and work in Egypt between 2008 and 2012, and then 4 years in Sudan. So I was there during the revolution in Cairo. And then we felt that very much artists, creative people played a role. And there has been a lot of analysis why at that time did we have the Arab Spring. The people, being photographers, being not only cartoonists, all types of artists played such a role. And that's something else also you mentioned. I have one quote of you. Art is about disturbing the comfortable. Yeah, I think that is what is the special role? What is the special creativity? Of artists? Because that I admire very much in artists.
Special role of artists.
Can you elaborate a little bit on that? It's not so much a question on how to elaborate on that issue.
I think, you know, artists towards history were people that deliver messages, right? From the drawings in caves to hieroglyphics to, you know, to Mara. You know, it's like it's all about telling this is what's happening right now, and telling it in a way that everybody can be receptive to it. You know, I think, you know, most of the like one of the things that exploded, of course, like the first thing that exploded in the Arab Spring was art, and I think that's because we don't have those spaces to show our work, you know, to show how we feel about things. There was a lot of street art, and people wrote on walls not because they love street art. We didn't know street art, you know. They wrote on walls because this is how mad people were. They just wanted to tell that story to everyone, you know. So it's about telling people that the fear is broken. You know, I remember going to Khartoum last year during the protests, right? I was in Khartoum, and driving in Khartoum, and you see graffiti, right? Like a pro-revolution graffiti. And it's, you know, how much of a police state that Khartoum was. So it's how dangerous is it for someone to get spray paint and go in the main street and write these messages and run, right? It doesn't look pretty, but it's art, it's beautiful, right? Because people look at it and you know, everybody's like, wow, man, this is like the courage of this person. So it really broke the fear. I have a beautiful picture of two young girls with their backpacks and they're graffitiing anti-government graffiti in the street in Khartoum. It's amazing. And that's the message of the artist is to do that, if you choose so, of course. I mean, you know, a lot of our work, you know, a lot of the work here, I think in the West is like, it's art for art's sake, right? Which we don't have the privilege to have. You know, we like, you know, a lot of people are very talented, they do beautiful things, but it's, you know, it's who are you selling? Like, you know, if you do a beautiful thing, we don't have that ecosystem of people buying from you anyways. You know, who's going to buy from you art? Like when people are struggling with everyday life, right? So, you know, most of the artists are, you know, yeah, you know, so they're trying to produce things. So for us to produce, for us to tell more messages, for us to work, there needs to be a change in that system. Right? So that's what I was talking about, you know. The whole world was talking about the art and during the Sudanese revolution and during the Egyptian revolution. And after that, most of my friends from Egypt now left. Most of the artists left because there's no way. What are you going to do? You know, the next revolution is going to be by young artists, the same thing. And then the same thing is going to happen. They're going to leave, you know. So now what I'm trying to do is empower those artists. Empower the artists who are there now, who worked in this revolution, so they can keep going, so we don't have another dictatorship. Because if you have strong art, if you have strong people that tell strong messages, people will always listen.
Yeah. Thank you. Anybody else here?
Hello, thank you so much. And you mentioned that funding is limited for someone that really appreciates your art, not just as a Sudanese person, but for the young diaspora or the people that are really interested in your art. What can we do to support you, and what can we do to help to continue?
First of all, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Well, it's, you know, I'm trying to work with people that understand how to manage the finances, because I think that's very important. So we're trying to have, you know, like online accounts or whatever, and it's a whole thing, because bringing money into Sudan is a whole other issue, of course, because of the sanctions and all of that. So it's just very complicated. But you know, I'm trying to work with people that understand how to do that, you know. And of course, there's there's crowdsourcing and crowdfunding and stuff like that, which I will do. But I just need someone to manage this whole thing. But thank you, and I will definitely contact you for your money.
Anybody else? Yeah.
Thank you very much. Well, guys, first of all, thank you very much. Very inspiring. I'm a friend of Khalid, so I'm not going to ask him anything. We can debate later. But Pravini, I think your work is very interesting. But what I get, and like speaking from the same like perspective that Khalid was speaking from earlier, some people, especially when you're talking about power dynamics, you feel like they're a bit tired and sick of this like racism, like dialogue. So how do you engage them in the conversation and make them feel like they want to get involved positively, not just to defend themselves in a way?
Yeah. So I think, let me speak for myself. I made this film specifically for people of color, and decided whatever white people want to do with it, that's up to them. So I didn't think of, you know, trying to engage white people. And I have to say, there are many white people who support, you know, the decolonial movement, and there are many people of color who also find it difficult. So I do want to, you know, provide that that nuance. But I think, you know, sometimes we have a very specific audience in mind, and in my case, it was, like Khalid also mentioned, empowerment, to let people know they're not alone, to provide them with a language and an analysis and role models and examples of strategies that work in the movement. And I think that it's okay to have that audience in mind and then have that conversation, and then try other ways of engaging other types of audiences. So to give you an example, I made this film as an artist outside of my job. I have a regular job to pay the bills, but fortunately, I also like my regular job because it focuses on diversity and inclusion in education and the labor market. And the types of conversations that you just mentioned are those conversations that I have. And the way that I approach it is to really think about where the people are right now, and to offer them, you know, a way of looking at things without pointing the finger, and say, you know, so that they also feel at ease. But the reason why I made this film was because I became frustrated with the slow pace. And, you know, I became frustrated because I wanted to take them to point Z, and I was at point A. And I know there are a lot of people who feel the same and are trying to find, you know, ways to move forward. So I wanted to make this film with that specifically in mind, and say, okay, well, you know, we have people who are still trying to explore that issue, but for people who are already, you know, who already know what it means to be uncomfortable, this is the next step, and this is the way to move forward. So my main issue would be also have a diversity in how you approach different types of conversation, depending on the context and the audience. So we don't have to have a universal approach for these types of conversations.
Thank you. Very interesting.
I think there's a follow-up.
Oh, there's a follow-up question as well.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you very much. So, like thinking about it strategically, like, are you not afraid of like alienating people who are in the gray area?
It depends. So again, within my work, my approach is building relationships, because I think there's a phrase by Rita Pearson, I think it was, she had a TEDx talk, we don't learn from people we don't like. And so I think through relationships, we can have these difficult conversations, but, as an artist, you don't know everyone. So then you have to decide, am I going to use my authentic, unapologetic voice and say what I need to say, and then leave it up to the audience how they interpret it? And in what context do I want to, engage in these relationships? And sometimes, we need to also divide the work. It's not all on us individually to have these conversations. It's a collective effort. So maybe someone doesn't want to listen to me, but wants to listen to you. So how do we ensure that we're in this together, and that it's not an individual struggle, but a collective struggle?
Great. Is there a final question somebody would like to ask? Yeah. Let me see how to get to you in the quickest way.
Thank you. For Khalid. So, Khalid, you mentioned the power and the dynamics of the internet, your medium, and how it initially started your career, actually, how it gave you exposure. So, with looking at the title of this talk, which is freedom, has your sense of freedom changed looking at the timeline of your experience? Do you feel, because you mentioned in your talk, I never knew what I was doing, or I didn't know what I was doing. So do you know what you're doing now? Do you get my question?
Yeah. It's, I think it's a journey, definitely, that I've been through. And it was definitely comforting to talk to other people that went through the same thing, and realizing that we're all at the same stage, that we thought that this is the way to do it, and then realized this is way bigger than us individually, and we need to do something bigger, and we need to do something without basically burning ourselves out and all of that. Do I look at freedom differently now? Definitely, I look at freedom differently. I mean, it's I always believed that I'm not free. I always believed that we're not free, but there was a time where you can't really talk about these things without people looking at you in a weird way, But now, with WikiLeaks and Edward Snowden, and there's a lot of evidence that this is true. Like, this is a fact, right? That we are not free. That there's a lot of censorship and a lot of surveillance and so on. So, but in my work, I think now I have the knowledge and I hope the wisdom to do something in a way that doesn't jeopardize my family as I used to do, and in a way that I will, with keeping the same impact, hopefully. So I'm trying, and it's a new way, and it's a new time. And again, I don't know. I still don't know. But I hope that this is the right way. But I think this is life, right? You just learn as you go.
Is jeopardizing your family a thing that is constantly in your mind when you create work?
Absolutely. I mean, it's you always look over your shoulders, like, is this gonna, what's gonna happen now? Is this too much? So it's because it's when you have to, like, a huge part of our culture is respect, and when you make fun of something, that means or someone, that means you don't respect them, and a lot of people take that really seriously, right? So for me, I need to know how to talk about it, and also because you don't want to divert the conversation, right? Because in our part of the world, anybody just wants a reason to divert the conversation from what the actual thing is. So I really need to think about that image, and that's what I was telling you about censorship is creativity. Because if I, for any reason, I draw a naked woman, whatever I was drawing about is not going to be the subject. The whole issue is going to be he drew a naked woman. So now I lost my case. Like, it's not like I did what I want, great, but I'm not, this is not what I wanted to do. So I have to think about, okay, so how do I do this in a way that it will get to as many people as possible without any diversions of the conversation, So, and that diversions include the, not upsetting or trying not as upsetting as much, right? But everything upsets them, of course. But like you're trying to figure out, okay, these are my and every time you push the red line a little bit more to see what happens. But of course, I ended up upsetting everybody. So it was the authorities, because again, you punch up, you don't punch down.
But would your art or your cartoons be different if you wouldn't consider that form of censorship towards your family? Would you draw differently? Would you create something different?
It's my family is in a lot of ways, it's not only the security, I think it's also the culture. Like I have to think my mom is going to see this, like my mom calls me sometimes, put, take that off, right? Like take that off the internet, so it's just like my first editor, so it's whether it's dangerous or she thinks it's dangerous or whether she thinks, people are gonna, so for me, I need to really think about all of these things, not only in a way that, this is gonna upset, but you do what you can, and in a way that as much as you can, try to start a conversation that leads to something.
Right. Pravini, is censorship in one way or another also a thing that you have to deal with while creating your film or creating your music?
I wouldn't say censorship, but I do think the idea of self-censorship plays a role for people of color in the West, because you're already self-policing because you are aware of how whatever questions you may address might kind of affect, for instance, your livelihood. Fortunately, I'm in a context where my work is very much aligned with my art. I think that was actually a process for me because, this is my first film, and before this, I just did music. But I initially wanted to have kind of this mainstream appeal, trying to break through on a mainstream level. But mainstream success does not allow for you to criticize Zwarte Piet, So you refrain from saying something about it. And for me, it was a process to make a conscious decision to be political and unapologetic in that sense, and accept whatever consequences that may have for, the audience that you reach. And that was actually okay, because then you reach another audience that is very much aligned with your political views. And it's a community of support. So yeah, that is how I look at it.
And by making that choice, it sounds like you found freedom as well in order to really find your voice and express your voice.
It's a mental liberation, I think even if your body is in shackles, if you in your mind don't let that affect your spirit, your resistance, I think that is a type of mental liberation.
Right. Final question. We will return here in 5 years. Where will you be based, and what will you be doing within 5 years?
You want to go first? I need to think first.
Pravini, save him.
Yeah, so actually, I don't know, and I like not knowing.
Gun against your head. It's too easy
because,
not knowing.
because if you asked me 5 years ago if I would make this film, I would have said no. And I think that is the beauty of art. You kind of let your creative ideas lead you. And for me, sometimes that is even a spiritual journey, where sometimes I feel like I'm connected with my ancestors who also kind of empower me. And so I really try to see what is going on right now, and how do I feel about that, and how do I want to express that. In the past it was music, now it's film, and who knows what the future brings. I really leave that open to you know, whatever comes my way.
All right. You can't say have the same answer. So
what she said.
no.
I don't know. I mean, right now, you know, one of the biggest, you know, two big projects I'm working on is Fada, and I really want to push that to make it a movement for people to use it and for it to be a normal thing for people to share their facilities or their spaces with other people. And the other thing that I'm very passionate about, of course, is the library. So, you know, it would be perfect that, you know, if in 5 years we did build that library and I'm in Sudan and you know, just living normally, really, you know, and trying to debate in a democratic, still civilian country, hopefully.
If in 5 years you still live in Copenhagen and it's not possible yet to live in Sudan, how would you feel then?
I can't be in Copenhagen because I have a 1-year visa. So that's like, there you go. Welcome to my world. You know, so even dreams like not work. I don't know. I have no idea where I'm going to be. I have no idea, really. In a year's time, if I can't go back home, I have no idea.
Isn't that a scary thought that you only have certainty for a year to be in Copenhagen?
Absolutely, absolutely, and it's very limiting in a lot of ways.
And the control freak in me wants to ask you, what is your plan B? What is your plan C? What are you going to do?
Just hope for the best and work for it, you know?
Right. Well, thank you both so much for sharing your stories. Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for being here. And hopefully we'll see you at the next program in the Bali. There's a new Freedom Lecture on the 7th of December here. And do I need to say anything? Sophie, do I need to say anything else to the audience before
My book is outside.
Then thank you. Oh,
Please.
the book for $27.50 is being sold outside. Have a great evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys for sitting through this.
Thank you, man. That was great.